Welcome to It's a New Day. My name is James Young. And today my guest is?
Minister Raymond Scott.
We talked off camera, and I know that you're originally from Buffalo. Mm-hmm. And how did you come here?
Well, when I started studying for the ministry, I came here for two reasons. Number one was my wife of 46 years, now soon to be 47 in June. She was living here, and at the same time, Minister Franklin Florence was here. And when I came for the first time, he was very warm and engaging because we were members of the same church, the Churches of Christ. And so when I came here, he was very warm and engaging and turned out to be a mentor of mine in the ministry. And so he was here, my wife was here, my wife to-be was here, and so what better place to live? And at that time, Rochester was called Smugtown, USA. Yes, yes. But at the same time, at that time, Rochester had jobs plenty. I mean, they had jobs aplenty at that particular time. And I remember coming here, and the thing that struck me about it was that like Kodak and Xerox and Bausch & Lomb were advertising on billboards saying help wanted. And a lot of the people here I noticed were working two full-time jobs, our folks. And so it was just the place to be. And then with the civil rights movement really beginning to spread, and Franklin was involved in that. And as I said, I was impressed with him. And he was the first black man that I ever met that talked about God like he really knew him. And I wanted that. I wanted to learn from him, and I did.
And now that segues me into my next question about going into the ministry. Mm-hmm. I guess my interest in that question or in the answer is because you're a young man.
Were a young man.
You were a young man. Yeah. And I notice most young men or most young people, the only time we're concerned about religious or God is when we're in trouble mm-hmm. or if we're dying, mm-hmm. okay? But in your case, neither one of those were the case. And what interests you to going into the ministry? Is it a calling like so many say?
It is a calling. The Holy Spirit just began to invade my life, but he did it gradually. And I remember I used to go out, I used to party, I used to drink, get high, and fight. So at one point I remember being at a nightclub that I used to frequent in Buffalo. It's called the Little Harlem. And I remember being on the dance floor and something just began to speak to me, like I was speaking to myself saying, "What are you doing here? You know, you don't belong here. What are you doing here? What are you doing?" And so I kind of pushed the thought aside. And I didn't know what was going on, but it was just like all the things I was doing, I felt like I no longer wanted to do. And I was about 21, 22 at the time. And so what happened was that I remember that same voice and that same spirit began to haunt me. And it began to speak more and more to me and louder to me. And I remember that I was at a place called the New Skateland in Buffalo. And Ike and Tina Turner were performing there in their review. And it was a dance. And I remember for some reason that night, I just didn't dance. I just stood there and watched the show. And people were dancing all around me, and I just watched the show. I just wanted to see them perform. And I remember that same voice came back. Said, "What are you doing here? You don't belong here. Why are you here?" You know. And I remember that at that particular point, I was going to church because I had a job for a long time that prohibited me from going because I had to work on Sunday. But then I changed jobs, and I started going back to church on Sunday. And when I was growing up, you either went to church or you couldn't go to the movie. So a lot of us would go to the movies on Sunday afternoons, and if we didn't go to church in our house, then we couldn't go to the movies. So I would go to church. I was born and raised in the church. I would go to church on a fairly regular basis, other than the times that I skipped and went to my buddy's house who didn't have to go to church, and I'd act like I'd gone to church and then come home at an appropriate time and then go to the movies. So the church, religion, Jesus was in me all that time. And so when I would leave, when I would leave home, I would go to church all the time. It was just in me. So when I came to Rochester, and I'm sorry, let me back up. When I was going out, then all of these things began to happen. I remember I went to a New Year's Eve. We would club hop, and so I went to several bars that night, and wound up going back home high. And I said, "This is enough. This is enough." And I just heard that voice, and I said, "Yeah, this is enough. What am I doing?" And so I just stopped, and we used to have the week-long revivals at our churches in Buffalo. There were simultaneous revivals, meaning every church had a speaker coming in to the revival. And at our church, we had this guy named Pastor Johnson out of White Plains, New York. And he came in and he spoke, and I was moved by his messages. So I went to talk to him, and I just kind of opened up to him and just, shared some of the things that were going on within me and the voices I was hearing and so on and so forth. And he said, "Ray," he just waited for me to finish. He said, "Ray, I want to tell you something." He said, "You've been called to the ministry. Everything you've told me." He said, "You've been called to the ministry. That's the Lord talking to you." And I said, "Me? No, not me." I said, "Man, I can't even talk that well, And I said, and I curse a lot, and every other word I used was curse word at that particular time. I said, "No." He said, "No, don't fight it." He said, "Don't fight it." I said, "Man, no, not me. Maybe a deacon or something like that, but not a minister." He said, No, you've been called." And we used to fight a lot, and I used to carry 2 knives. One was about like that, switchblade, and the other one was like that. It was stiletto. And I learned how to get them out quick. So like I said, we used to fight a lot. And so I went home. I never will forget that. I was just in a total daze when I left this house. I was just totally dazed. I was just in a zone, just blanked out, just walking, and wasn't even aware of the fact that I was walking. And I went home to pray, and I said, "Well, Lord, if you're calling me to the ministry, then I better start reading the Bible, at least, because I don't know nothing about it. I mean, I just know things I've heard. I know nothing about it." So at that point, from that point on, I just began to pick up the Bible and read it, but I still had the same girlfriend, and she was still going out, and I had stopped. So, but I used to always go to the Pine Grill. Pine Grill was comparable to the Pithot here.
Yes.
And that was my hangout every weekend. That was one of the places I used to go doing the bar hopping. And I remember I used to go out there. I still went out there after I decided I was going to change, but I wouldn't go in the Pine Grill. I would stand out in front of it with the friends that I had previously had. And they were still going in. And so one night I left my girlfriend's house and I came down to the Pine Grill, and there was a guy that I used to go to school with, and we were good friends. And he knew I was studying for the ministry, that I was going to be going to the ministry. And he said to me, man, he said, you keep coming out standing in front of this place, you might as well go in. He said, you're here every time I come down here. He said, so you might as well go in. And I said, no, I don't need to go in. And he said, oh, you old lowlife. And he used the N-word. He said, you old lowlife. He said, you ain't changed. You know, he said, you ain't changed. You might as well just go on in here. You ain't changed. And my best friend was standing there, and he said, Raymond, he said, I agree with, Ike. He said, you're going to stand in front of you. You might as well go in it. And I never will forget it. Just then a cab pulled up and let a couple of people out. And when they got out of the cab, I got into the cab. And I went home and never went back. I never went back after that.
My next question after that is what did your friends say? And because I'm imagining that it must have taken a lot of courage to be able to take this path, knowing that you were living this particular life, the lifestyle of your friends, and now they see that you're going down a different road. And how did that impact you? What did you experience from that?
It's interesting. You're the first person in all these years that has asked that question. It was a very lonely feeling. Mm-hmm. It was very lonely because all of a sudden at one point I was surrounded by friends. We used to do things together. And all of a sudden, I'm not doing those things anymore. And the old adage is, birds of a feather flock together. Well, I was no longer in that crowd. I wasn't one of the birds of a feather. So I had nobody else to turn to, because strangely enough, when I thought I would develop fellowship with Christians, since I was a new Christian, newly committed to Christ, when I thought I would develop relationships in the church, I found out that the same people that were in the church that I was looking to fellowship with were doing the same things that I used to do and still going to church. So I didn't have, and because I was really committed, I mean, when I made the decision to go, I went. When I made the decision to change my life, I was really serious about that. And so I was too serious for the people in the church, and I wasn't serious enough for the people that were out there, who, if I was going to go back there, then fine, and be with them doing the things I used to do, that would have been fine with them. But I was kind of like a goody two-shoes to them. So they didn't really want to be around. It's like, yeah, man, yeah, okay, well, we'll catch you later, you know. Right. And then the people in the church, they thought I was too religious and that I was too serious about the Lord. And so these young folks didn't want to be bothered with me. So I was alone, man, and that was a very, very, very sad feeling. It was a very heavy feeling.
Will you tell me about your interactions with Reverend Florence, as you were mentioning that you came from Buffalo, you met him, mm-hmm. and he was somewhat of an influence onto you. Mm-hmm. Would you tell and share with the viewing audience what a day or a week or what it was being around Reverend Florence? And the reason why I ask that, because for many of the younger people who may not be aware of Reverend Florence, mm-hmm. He was a very powerful and dynamic mm-hmm. man in mm-hmm. this community. Mm-hmm. Now, I was much younger than he was or mm-hmm. is, and the younger group of us, we necessarily didn't always agree mm-hmm. with their philosophy and strategy of how to approach a situation because, as I said, we were young. And if you said no to us, we wanted to burn something
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
We considered ourselves militant.
Yeah.
But we had the utmost respect for Reverend Florence. As I said, I mean, this man would just come out many times, take an issue on by himself. And this in itself would turn into a whirlwind of the community getting behind him and supporting him. So please share with us what you had with him on a regular basis.
Well, that was one of the things that attracted me to him. When I came, it was shortly after I came to Rochester, or shortly before I came to Rochester, that fight started. And I came in 1966. And so that was, like I said, he was the first black man that I ever met that talked about God like he knew him, like it was very personal. I hadn't heard that before. I heard a lot of sermons, but I hadn't talked with somebody who talked about the Lord like he really knew him and like he had constant communication with him. And like I said, in the study for the ministry, that was brand new for me. I wanted that. And then the fact that he was involved in civil rights and that he was a leader in civil rights, and he was a fearless leader. You know, he would take on anybody and make his point. You know, whether it was the police, whether it was the mayor, you know, whether it's the county legislature, he would just take on anybody. You know, the other leaders within the community, if they were half-stepping, he would take them on. He would just take on anybody. And, you know, I admired that, you know, and a number of people were awestruck by that. And a number of people followed him for that reason. He and I, at that point, were very, very close. He was my mentor, and I used to just want to be around him. And there's biblical history that records that Paul, the apostle, sat at the feet of a man named Gamaliel. And Gamaliel is a guy that's still revered in Jewish circles. Now he was a rabbi. He's still revered in Jewish circles even to this day. He was a great teacher. And Paul, the apostle, sat at his feet and learned from him. Well, that's the way I felt about Franklin. I just wanted to sit at his feet. And so anytime I could get with him, anytime that I had the opportunity to get with him, I took it. And I remember some Saturday nights, we would sit on the church stoop, and we would start talking at 9 o'clock. And mainly me listening. We started talking at 9 o'clock in the morning, sitting on the church stoop, and we wouldn't leave there till sometimes 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And we had to get up. I had to go across town where I lived. He just went inside because his house was upstairs over the church. But I had to go across town, and we would leave there, and he had to preach the next day, and I had to come back and teach a Bible class in the morning. But you know, it was something like floating on a cloud, you know, because I felt like I was learning. I was being imbued with wisdom, and so I would listen to this guy, you know, for all that time. We had a few of those 5 or 6 hour conversations, man, with me just listening. And it made a big difference. And there were a number of guys that he mentored along the way. And I said to a group of people at this function that we had for him last year to honor him, you know, Franklin would challenge you. He would challenge you. He would challenge you if you were with him. He would challenge you if you were against him. And if you stood up to the challenge, then you became a better man. You became a man. If you didn't stand up to the challenge, then you became something else. Exactly. And I won't use the word. But there were a lot of guys that fell by the wayside because they didn't stand. But those that did became better men.
Exactly.
And I think that that was pivotal in my life because it did stand.
I want to fast forward us now to Attica. I'm not sure, because I was in Attica at the time during the rhyme, I'm not sure how they chose you to become one of the negotiators. Do you know how that happened?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
please share that
Yeah.
with us.
I was in my office. I was president of FIGHT at the time.
Okay, right.
And I was in my office, and I got a call from a sister, and she's been like a sister to me for 40 years, Annette Thomas. And she was at that time, she was in Hanover Houses.
Yes.
And she called me and said, Scotty, she said, have you heard about what's going on in Attica? And I said, no. Why? What's going on? She said, there's been a rebellion. She said, and I'm here with a group of ladies who have loved ones up there, and we can't find out anything. And so I said, okay, well, she said, well, we want to come up to the office and see what we can do. I said, okay, fine, come on. You know, and I had no idea what to do. There's a principle that people need to grab, and it's called the 7 levels of separation, meaning you can be here, and here's where you want to get to somebody here. And with 6 or 7 phone calls, you can wind up talking to the President of the United States, literally talking. I don't mean get a message to him, but I mean literally talking to the President of the United States. Even if it's the Pope, you make 7 phone calls and you wind up talking to the Pope directly. It's just the right 7 phone calls. You know, so I didn't know anybody, you know, that could get me to Attica at that particular time. But they came over. They came over to the office and they explained everything that had happened. So I thought about it, and I was a commissioner on the board of commissioners of the Rochester Housing Authority at that time. And there was a guy on the board at that time who was an attorney, a friend of mine. His name was Don Corbett. He turned out to be a surrogate judge, but he was the chairman of the board at that particular time. So I called Don, and he's an attorney, high up in the Democratic Party at that time. I said, Don, listen, man, I got some people here. There's a riot going on in Attica, and I got some people here who have loved ones there, and they're trying to get word, trying to get some word as to how their loved ones are doing. And I said, I know that Arthur Eve is up there because they told me about that. I said, I know that Arthur Eve. Well, I knew Arthur from Buffalo, but I mean, I didn't know him. I was a kid when he was older than me. And so I said, but if we can get there and talk to him, I can get the word back to them in terms of what's going on. And he said, Don used to smack his lips all the time while he's thinking. He said, let me call you right back. He said, I'm going to call John Parinello, and then I'll call you right back. John was the vice mayor of the city of Rochester at that time. So he called John, and then he called me back, and he said, Ray, he said, John and I are coming over to the office now. I said, okay, fine. So they came, and John was high up in the Republican Party. The Republicans at that time not only controlled the county legislature, but they also controlled the city council at that time. And so John and Don Corbett came over, and you know, we explained the situation to them. And John says, okay, he said, let me do something. So he got on the phone and he called Barbara Carnival, who was a congressman at that particular time. And Barbara Carnival told him that the Monroe County Police, Monroe County Sheriff's Department, was going down to Attica the next morning to provide support for the state troopers and the guards and all of that. He said, so you might want to call him and see what they can do. So you might want to call the Monroe County Sheriff's Department and see what they can do. So he called Andy Maloney, who was the undersheriff. Sheriff Skinner was the sheriff at that particular time. He called Andy Maloney, who was really running things at that time, told Andy what the situation was, and Andy told John, he said, well, have Reverend Scott meet us at 4:30 in the morning down in front of the public safety building, and they can ride down with us. So I said, okay, well, I called Marvin Chandler and said, listen, you're going to Attica with me. Reverend Marvin Chandler. So Marvin and I met, and we went down to the public safety building, and the long and the short of it was that we rode down behind the motorcade to get through the roadblocks because they weren't letting anybody through there. And so we got onto the campus of Attica and started looking for Arthur, and I asked around. He hadn't gotten there yet that morning. And so we waited around to talk with him and for him to come. And finally I saw him pull up, and I said, Arthur, Minister Ray Scott from Rochester, I know you're from Buffalo. And we shook hands, and I introduced him to Reverend Marvin Chandler as well. So I'm president of Fight Organization in Rochester. He knew about Fight. And so I said, listen, we've been talking to some of the people that have loved ones here at Attica, and they want to know what's going on, and they'll believe what you tell them or what we tell them that you said. So can you let us know what's going on? He said, well, hold on. He said, let me go inside a minute. I have to see the commissioner. He said, and then I'll come back out and talk with you. So he went inside, and we thought he was going to come back out and talk to us and tell us what was going on. He came out looking around, and he finally spotted us. And he said, listen, I just talked to Commissioner Oswald. He's heard that you're here. And I had met him once before when I was trying to help a guy get out on parole. So he said he's heard that you're here. And he's asked if you'd be willing to come in and go into D-Yard with us and see if we can put an end to this thing. And I just immediately said, yes.
Just hold that thought. What I want to ask you, you're coming into Attica, I guess you're out, are you in front of the place?
In front of the place.
Have you seen the front door, the gun tower, and all of that yet?
Well, I had been to Attica before to visit some brothers. So I was familiar with that. I mean, it's that big wall, that big gray wall.
That's what I want you to do. I would like for you to describe, because my description, I think people thinking that I'm just totally, exaggerating this. But I would like for you to describe, and describe Attica, and also what were you thinking emotionally? Because what I was thinking when they brought me to Attica, all I could think of is, how do I survive this? Okay? Because that's how bleak it was for me. I mean, I had never experienced anything like this before in my life. I mean, you're coming under different circumstances. What was that like for you? I mean, because you're not a criminal, you're not being incarcerated, you're coming as a productive citizen to try to help a situation that is just blown out of hand. I wanted to know, what when you first saw this, and emotionally, what were you thinking?
Well, the walls at Attica, I mean, people have to go there and see it. It's just like a huge, in old times we would call it a fort. There's nothing architecturally beautiful about it. It's not attractive. It's just a big, big gray fortress wall. And it, in and of itself, is intimidating. And then, of course, you had people around with guns on the roof and that kind of thing. But the wall in and of itself was just, it was just intimidating, very intimidating. I mean, I had been there before the Attica riots to visit somebody, as I said. So I'd seen it, but even if I go back today, the feeling is the same. There's just a big, intimidating wall. And then you had, at that particular time, all of these concerned people who had loved ones inside. I'm not talking about the inmates, I'm talking about the guards, because some of the guards were hostages, and so they didn't know what was going on inside. And then obviously there was concern, there was anger, you know, all of that standing outside. So when Arthur came back and he made his way to us and asked us to go inside, it was like, that's something you don't stop to think and say, well, should I or shouldn't I? So I just spoke. I mean, I wasn't thinking about what could happen. We get inside, we have to sign these papers saying if anything happens to you, we're not responsible, you know. So, but it was like, I mean, I was young, idealistic at that particular time. So I didn't really stop to think. I just did, you know. And so when we got in there, met with the commissioner, and he told us what the situation was, and said, "Then we're going to go into D-Yard." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "And we want to see if we can resolve this issue." And there were only 5 of us at the time: Commissioner Oswald, Arthur Eve, Marvin Chandler, myself, and Tom Steele. And we went on in, and when I walked inside D-Yard, man, I saw that mass of brothers, and wow. And again, there was, I'd be lying if I said that there wasn't a tinge of fear. I wasn't scared. I wasn't really scared, but there was a tinge of it. But the fear was allayed. The fear was set aside when I began to walk through that gauntlet that you guys had set up. And guys began to say, "Scotty." I look over, and there was somebody I knew from Rochester. And I remember a guy sitting on the ground with his legs crossed. He said, "Raymond." I said, "Billy," a guy from Buffalo that I knew. And then another guy sitting on the ground with his leg crossed. He used to be a track star in Buffalo, named Melvin. And I said, "Melvin." And he had this hat, same hat he used to wear in Buffalo all the time, had this hat on. And I said, "Melvin." And he said, just smiled, and he was sitting on the ground with his legs crossed. And so I began to see that as we went through the gauntlet to get up to the head of the table. I didn't know what was going to take place. And so when we got up to the head table, finally, then there was this guy. I don't know if you remember this. There was this guy that was talking. He was mad because he said Oswald had lied to them.
Right.
And he was mad. And he said, and that picture's in the New York Times. It was there the next morning with him pointing down at Oswald, you know. And he's standing on the table, and I was standing next to him. And he said, we just might not let you out of here. And I remember I took the mic after that, and I said, "Now listen, brothers." I said, "No matter whether or not they keep their word, we're going to keep ours." And I said, "We guaranteed this man safe passage in and safe passage out. Now we're going to keep that promise." And all the brothers cheered, and we got out of there, you know. But it was just. I could not imagine. I mean, I could not imagine what it was like to be there and not be able to walk out. I just couldn't even imagine that.
Well, let me share one thing with you, then we'll come back to this. Because when I talk about Attica, the one thing that is the most pronounced for me, and I will never, ever forget this. I was in B Block, and B Block was the metal shop. I'll never understand why they even had a metal shop. First of all, because you got all this metal. These guys, okay, I mean, this is the last thing that you want is metal with these guys. Anyway, I'm in B Block, and we're in the metal shop, and we hear the doors, I mean, literally come off the hinges. They pull the doors off, and we're trying to figure out what's going on. It was such a whirlwind, a whirlpool, if you will, of emotions. There was no such thing that you said, okay, I'm not going to participate in this.
Yeah.
Okay, you couldn't. There was no room for that. And even if you were thinking that, because of the force and the magnitude of the anger, the rage, it literally just swept you up.
Yeah.
And you had no choice. I mean, you were swept up where the crowd was going.
Yeah.
That's where you
Yeah.
went and ended up in D Yard. What sticks out in my mind is that first night in the yard. These guys, the way Attica is built, the way the windows are built. Now, yes, you can look outside and you can tell if it's dark or daytime, but you can't see the stars. You can't see the moon. You can't see the sun. And I don't care how you tilt to try to look out those windows, the way the guy designed those windows made it impossible. This was part of his design to put for the facility. So there are guys that had not seen the stars 5 years, 10 years, 30 years. And that first night, it was the most amazing thing, because here, this rage during the daytime destroying this facility. Guys who have committed crimes, heinous crimes, some of them. But that first night, everybody laid down on the grass. It was quiet. I mean, not a sound.
Wow. Yeah.
I don't know how many of us, there were several hundred of us in the yard.
Yeah.
Everybody just laying on their backs looking at the stars. That, to me, for that moment, our humanity had somehow come back and touched us all in the yard. And that, to me, is the most memorable thing about the ride. It was just, that's something that will always impact me. I'll never forget that. But
Well,
let's,
the question becomes, because that's so powerful, man, the question becomes, how do we portray that to the kids of today so that they understand, on the one hand, what liberty is about, what freedom is about, and on the other hand, what it's like to have it taken away, to the extent that just lying on your back and looking up at the stars, and something we take for granted, can mean so much. You know, I guess I'm listening to you talk about that. I mean, obviously, we didn't have to go through that because we didn't stay in the yard that long. We were in and out, in and out, in and out, in and out, as observers and trying to help negotiate a solution. But for a person to spend 5 years, 10 years, 15 years in there under those conditions and not being able to just see the stars, by the time the stars come out, people were locked up.
yes.
They were locked away, so they didn't see stars. And just to be able to have that feeling, but that's what it's like when your freedom is taken away. But yet we find that happening so much today with the young kids.
And that's the purpose and the meaning of you being here, because I purposely wanted to draw this picture of how you were growing up, like any other black young male. Then you get this calling and you begin to change your life. Not only do you change your life, but you move to a new city, new environment. You were very fortunate to be under the tutelage of Reverend Florence. I mean, if you had to be under someone, I couldn't think of a better person to be guided by. And then this incident happens, the Attica riot. You come there, you're just as young, the same age just about as I was, but coming from a different perspective on this.
I was in my early 20s.
Same thing. And to answer your question, how we begin to get young people to understand this is through the conversation that we're having now. because I want young men to see what you saw, to be able to see it through your eyes before they actually get there, and see it with a pair of handcuffs on.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why I wanted you to be able to describe what you felt when you saw the wall, when you saw Attica, to be able to talk about the attitudes of the families of the correctional guards and the attitude that they gave you and the observers or family members that were inmates, and how they had that division. And you had nothing to do with the riot. I mean, you're being there as an observer, but yet you're still feeling the anger.
Well, it's so interesting. When we were in the administration building between our visits into D-Yard, I remember they were feeding us. They sent pizza in. And it's amazing how you look back at that, and you don't stop to think of what they could have done to the pizza.
Exactly.
You know, but they were bringing in pizza. And there was this one short, dumpy guy that came in with the pizza. He was a prison guard. And he brought the pizza in. He walked into the room, brought the pizza in, looked around at us, threw the pizza on the table. Said, if I had known where this was coming, he said, I wouldn't have brought it, you know. And then he walked out, you know. So they were royally ticked off at us for just being there. When they took over the prison on that day, I was in the administration building. We were looking out. Well, they told us to stay away from the windows. Stay away from the windows. And we had to bandage ourselves, our clothes to us. We had to tape our clothes to us, and because the tear gas that was going to be put in the yard would come through the windows. And we had to wear wet cloths around our faces, you know, and if we could get anything on our heads, we had to do that. But we had to wear wet cloths around our faces, like handkerchiefs. And we had to tape our clothes to our ankles and tape our clothes to our wrists. And in spite of all of that, and we were not far away, but we were away. And we could look down if we chose to see what was going on. And we could see some of the guards who weren't supposed to be involved in retaking the prisoners on the catwalks. But they shot so much tear gas into that place, man, that, and you know, but it came into the building, and even the windows were closed, and it still got into the building and into our eyes. It still did. Yeah.
You know, some of the pictures that were taken from Attica, many people think that that was an overcast day. That was tear gas.
Yeah, it was tear gas, that's right. Well, the interesting thing about that, too, is that every word that we got at that particular time was that they had sharpshooters on the wall who were going to pick off the hostage holders who were standing behind the hostages. So that was the purpose of the sharpshooters. And the DNC last year, around the anniversary of the Attica Rebellion, had pictures of the retaking of the prison. And they had pictures of the guys who had the hostages on that platform. And man, there was no picking off of the hostage holders. There was no picking. They just mowed everybody down, and you could see people falling like dominoes. They just hit them, and you could just see them falling, boom, 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 boom. Prisoners and the people who were standing behind them and all of that. And I remember being there. I just wanted to know who had died, who had gotten killed. And we didn't know for a lot. I didn't know until I saw that film that they didn't try and pick off anybody. They just mowed them all down, the inmates and the hostages. They just mowed them all down. They just shot everybody. And you could see them right in this film, just falling like dominoes. And I remember just looking at that and saying, wow. And then I was standing by, I got a call from Marvin Chandler, who had talked to Dr. Edlin, who said, Island, yeah, said that he was going to make his announcement and he wanted us there. So Marv and I drove over there. Franklin Florence came down there, and I was in the press conference with him. And he said, in essence, I've completed my autopsy report, and that the long and the short of it is that everybody who died of gunshot wounds. I was busy looking over his shoulder to see whose names were on that list that he had on the podium. And I was looking for LD's name and some of the other brothers that I knew. And I did see some. I saw Melvin Gray and a guy named Willie West from Buffalo that I knew. And I said to him, all of those people on that list dead. And he just kind of ignored my comment because this was in the middle of the press conference. He was still talking to the media. And I said, I asked you a question. Are all of those people on that list dead? And he said, yes, and then turned back. And I was just lost at that point because I saw LD's name on there. And then I remember I didn't grab the significance of what he had said. I was just so gone about those guys being dead. And when I walked away from, when the press conference was over, Franklin came up to me, and I never will forget, he said, Scott, he said, did you hear what he said? And he said that everybody died of gunshot wounds. He said the inmates had no guns. And that's when it hit me. It's like, wow, they murdered those brothers. They just killed them all. They killed not only the prisoners, the inmates, but they killed their own people. Mm-hmm. They killed them all. Just mowed them down. They weren't concerned about sharpshooting to pick off anybody. They just mowed them all down.
I remember you mentioned earlier about when you were first coming in and you saw them on the roofs with the guns. Mm-hmm. I wanted to know if you happen to know this, because it was apparent that we had no guns. Mm-hmm. It wasn't even apparent to us that they were going to even come in with guns. Mm-hmm. Until we started talking. If you remember before, it was just a few days before the riot in Attica, they had the uprising on Kent State. Mm-hmm. And they came in and they shot those
Exactly.
kids.
Exactly.
And so we were debating, were they going to do this to us? But we kept saying, well, they're not going to do it. And then we went back and, well, they shot those kids. Mm-hmm. Man, they're going to come in here and wipe us out. Mm-hmm. But we really never thought that would happen. And we never saw them on the roof mm-hmm. until the actual day when they took the yard back.
Yeah. Well, we didn't see them on the roof that whole time either. When we saw them on the roof, it was the day that they went back, the day they came in to take it. And if you looked out the window, you could see them on the roof. I thought sharpshooters, who weren't really sharpshooters. So we didn't see any around there, but I remember through all of my involvement in fight, and there were some lines even in the fight organization that I as a Christian just wouldn't cross. You know, I mean, I could be militant to a point, but there were just some lines that I just wouldn't cross. And those lines had not been crossed by me, nor had they been crossed by our adversaries during my tenure. So this whole time, I don't think that there was a guy in there, except one maybe, that thought that they would just come in there and do what they did. I don't. I just couldn't believe it. I mean, I didn't think they would do that. I didn't think that they would. The whole time I was in there, I didn't think that they were going to do that. You know, and I remember there was a guy named Clarence Jones, who was the president, CEO of the Amsterdam News at the time.
Mm-hmm.
He was the only one, in my estimation, that saw it clearly. And he came up to me and said, Ray, he said, they're going to kill these brothers. He said, they're going to kill these brothers. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe, even when he said that, I couldn't believe it. But he clearly saw it.
Well, he saw it when he came into the yard and he talked with us, because he got a wake-up call coming to Attica, because here he had bought the Amsterdam News for a substantial amount of money. He knew that he was somebody. And when he got to Attica, one of the correctional guards called him a nigger. And he mentioned that to us in the yard. And that's when he talked to a few people, and I was just happened to be privy to the conversation. But that's when we knew that they were going to come in and they were going to shoot, because we thought they were just going to come in and take the prison over. And here's the thing: if they had waited one more day, we would have given up. The only thing that stopped us from giving up, and I always have to give this praises and thanks to two people, and that's Roger Champion and Jerry the Jew. And the reason why we didn't give up, because we were ready to give up before they came in, especially when it started raining, we had had enough. But because there was no clarity on the amnesty issue, because if we had not gotten that, because the rest of the demands were debatable, negotiable, but we had to have the amnesty because of the officer Quinn dying. Because if we didn't have that, they would have charged every one of us with the murder, and that would have been a totally different set of circumstances. But it was because of that they kept holding on, trying to get the amnesty issue secure. But if they had waited one more day, because we had enough. I mean, we were ready to go, because we realized that we weren't going to get. We felt that we had done what we wanted to do. We knew that the world had finally taken notice of Attica. We knew now that even if we didn't get the things that we were demanding, the things that we wanted to get, at least the world knew of the conditions that were there. So if they had waited just one more day, we would have given up. But instead, they came in on the day, and then perhaps, you know, that this was in part of the design for all of that to happen, because this goes back to the question that you asked earlier. How can we get young men, how can we get young people to realize the devastation that they do to their lives when they step on the other side of the line?
Well, let me just give you a perspective too, and I've said this recently, because I didn't go back there for a long time. I didn't go back there for about 4 years after that. I just couldn't. When we came outside, remember I told you I remind you when we went in for the first time, just the 5 of us, and the guy was telling Oswald he was going to keep him in there, and you know I stood up and took the mic and said, you know, we're going to keep our word, and we guaranteed him safe passage in and safe passage out. And the brothers cheered and right on, you know, and so we got out of there. When we walked out of D Yard and went back up to the administration building where we were kind of housed, I was out there getting a drink of water at the fountain. And Oswald came up behind me and he said, Reverend, he said, you're a good man. He said, you're a good man. And he was thanking me for, you know, what I'd done to get him out of there. And he said, but you know, Reverend, he said, if that guard dies, then the whole game changes. He said, I won't be able to live up to any commitments that I made if that guard dies. You know, so he knew. And again, I didn't take that even that seriously, you know, but he knew that his hands were going to be tied if that happened. And so he said that to me. When I look back at Attica now, I think I look at it with a different perspective.
This hour goes by so quickly, but I want to ask you a question, or I want to put the question back to you. When you said, what can we do about the young men? What can we say? One of the things I wanted to ask you, if I can, maybe I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but after your experience of Attica and your ministry and interacting with people, trying to get them to do what is right, what do you think, from your perspective, what can we say to young people, and very quickly, okay, and succinctly, what can we say to young men, especially young men? How can we get them to see that going down this path of negativity, what it leads to?
Well, let me put it this way very quickly. There's one thing that the rich and the poor have in common. We all die.
Yes.
We all die. And I think that one of the things that I'm asking young guys today, I'm going back, and I'm asking, I do a Bible class at the House of Mercy every Wednesday night, the homeless shelter. And one of the questions that I'm raising with young guys in particular is, what are you going to do with Jesus? What are you going to do with Jesus? Because in the final analysis, you're going to have to face him, because you're going to die. And what are you going to do with him? You know, because that's something we lost. We lost our spiritual roots. And I used to say that black folks, I thought during that day, were the moral conscience of America. That's not the case anymore.
Exactly.
That is not the case anymore. I mean, I see guys doing things that I would have, man, if we had done those things, we would have thought lightning was going to come down. Where they gamble on the church stoops. You know, right down Jefferson Avenue, they were gambling on church stoops. You know, so it's like, what are you going to do? You have to make up your mind. You're either going to go this way or that way. What are you going to do? And as frequent as death occurs on our streets today, that's a very heady question for some of them, and they grapple with it.
And with that, I'm going to leave that question. What are they going to do with that, with the viewing audience? And I thank you so much for coming in. And I'd like to have you come back so we can talk about some other issues, but this has been really good, and I'm really looking forward to the viewing audience really enjoying this, and thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
My name is James Young. I look forward to seeing you next week. Be blessed, and remember, it's a new day.